Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Toastmasters Public Speaking webinar series. We are delighted to have you join us today for the Humor Workshop, Part 1. My name is Linda Williams, and unlike members of our panel today, I am not a comedian, but I do play one on TV. Not really. Actually, I'm a training and development specialist with Toastmasters International. Thank you so much for joining us from all around the globe. Before you meet our moderator and our panelists, I wanted to take a few minutes to set the stage for our time together. For the majority of the workshop, we'll be watching a live discussion between members of our expert panel. Maybe I should call them our comedy council. As we all laugh and learn together throughout this forum of funny today, we expect that you might have some questions. Please use the Q&A panel on your screen to submit them. And towards the end of the workshop, we will bring many of your questions into the conversation. With so many attendees, however, we might not be able to get to all of them, so we'll do our best and we appreciate your patience and understanding. While you will not be able to speak aloud, we encourage you to use the chat feature like you're already doing to continue talking with one another throughout the workshop. And we thank you in advance for always remembering to be polite and courteous to your fellow attendees. Also, please keep in mind that our team will be focusing on answering questions posted in the Q&A panel, not questions posted in the chat. This workshop is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email in a few days with a link to the recording. All right, final thing before I hand off the workshop to our moderator. The panel has asked me to gauge the humor level of the audience. Just how funny do we think we are? So if you'd like to, I'm going to ask you to answer one question using the polling feature. You'll see it on your screen in just a moment. Which of the following statements best describes you? I wish I were funnier. I can't tell if people are laughing with me or at me. People tell me I'm funny. Or I am hilarious. I'll give you a few more seconds to go ahead and answer that poll. I can see the results coming in, and it looks like I wish I were funnier is taking a little bit of a lead. In about 3 more seconds, and I'm going to stop the polling. All right, let's see our results. Yes, coming in at 45% of our audience, I wish I were funnier. Well, I think you're in the right place. I chose people tell me I'm funny, or wait, is it people tell me I'm funny looking? Anyway, I now have the grand honor of introducing our workshop moderator, Mark Brown. Mark is originally from Kingston, Jamaica, and he immigrated to the United States at 18 years old with only $40 in his pocket and a dream for a better life. In 1995, Mark defeated more than 20,000 contestants from 14 different countries to win the illustrious title of Toastmasters International World Champion of Public Speaking. Since that day, Mark has delivered more than 3,500 presentations on 5 different continents to more than 1.7 million people. Please welcome one of the most popular inspirational speakers in the world, the fabulous and funny Mark Brown.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you and, of course, our great panel of experts. I'm really thrilled today to introduce our first panelist, Stefan Dyer. Originally from Canada, from Costa Rica rather, Stefan is a banker turned comedian, get that, with 400 plus shows across 8 countries, including Peru, Mexico, and Malaysia. In 2017, After being one of the youngest senior managers at Scotiabank Toronto, he quit his lucrative bank job to pursue a professional career in stand-up comedy. Since then, he's been on Comedy Central, Second City, TEDx, some of the world's largest comedy festivals. And he is the co-founder and co-CEO of Malpensando, an award-winning bilingual public speaking and comedy school in Toronto, Canada. And he has empowered thousands of people to become funny and confident speakers. Welcome, Stefan. Our second expert today is Veronica Dangerfield. Veronica has won numerous awards for her work as a financial educator, and she talks about a topic that needs humor. Wow, financial education, go figure, right? Now, in addition to that, her current role, of course, is a financial educator, but she's also an award-winning international speaker, a published poet, and professional comedian. Now, old folks like me think Dangerfield doesn't look like him. Now, we've been told that her mesmerizing style will grab your mind, ignite your soul, whoop, and move you to be empowered with your money and then some. Our third and final panelist today is Drew Tarvin. A former engineer by profession, Drew calls himself a humor engineer, in that he's teaching people how to get better results while having more fun. How could he beat that? He's a corporate trainer, comedian, and keynote speaker based in New York. Now, as a speaker, he has delivered more than 500 talks in front of 35,000 plus people. His TED Talk, The Skill of Humor, has nearly 9 million views. Woohoo! As an author, he's written 3 best-selling books, including Humor That Works, The Missing Skill for Success, and Happiness at Work. Okay, let's get to it. Let's jump right to it and start learning about various types of humor. Now, I know that, friends, I'm glad you're all here. Welcome, Stefan. Welcome, Drew. Welcome, Veronica. Now, I know for a fact, we hear engineer, banking, financial planning, and our brains don't normally connect humor right away. So my first unprepared question is this, and I'll begin with Veronica, then Drew, then Stefan. How in the round world does someone in your industry end up being branded as humorous, funny, and comedian? Veronica, I'll go to you first.
Because people usually feel a little trauma about their finances because they don't understand that when you're bad with your finances, there's nothing wrong with you. You're simply being human. Our software has not been updated in 40,000 years, Mark. So if you just throw some humor in there and a little healing and forgiveness, it can reframe their experience, touch their hearts and their mind, and revolutionize full time.
I love that. I don't think anyone here will look at money the same way again. Thanks. Drew, the humor engineer, help us to connect engineering and humor, please.
Certainly. Well, Mark, as a fellow former computer programmer, maybe you kind of can agree with this, but for me, as a computer science engineer, the hardest resource I ever had to work with was other humans. I'm good with computers, not as good with people. And it turns out that in some ways, humor is a great kind of shortcut or a great way to build better rapport with humor. And to your point, I am not a naturally funny person. If you ask people from my high school if I was a funny person, or in fact, when they found out that I did comedy, they're like, but you're not funny. So I'm definitely one of those people that had to learn how to use humor. But as an engineer, as I was learning that skill, I was like, oh, wait, this can help me with the challenges that I'm having at work. And so that's how kind of the humor and the engineering came together.
That's awesome. Thanks, Drew. Thank you so much. Now, Stefan, a hotshot young banker on the rise to the top, and you leave that to be funny. Help us to understand how that happened, brother.
Well, when I went to quit, I told my vice president I quit, and she's like, "Is that one of your jokes?" And I'm like, "No, I'm serious. I'm quitting." And she's like, "Are you going to the competition?" I'm like, "No, to be a comedian." And they wouldn't believe it. At the end of the day, like Drew was saying, nobody in my family thinks that I'm that funny. Like my high school friends don't think that I'm that funny, but like everything, you can learn it. At the end of the day, there's different ways in which you can see comedy, but in my research and the books that I've read and the courses that I teach, it's basically truth and pain. It's tragedy plus time.
Yes.
Like the most beautiful things in the world, they're not that funny. In fact, we don't really like people who are perfect. So the more human you can be, the better the funny comes out. You know, it's simple, but there has to be some truth or some pain or some tragedy. And when you're ready to talk about it, it may be funny.
Well, you know, Stefan, I love that thought because I'm going to bounce to you, Veronica, and then back to you, Drew, on this one. You said comedy fits with pain. And right now, the way the world is, there's a lot of pain out there.
Yeah.
How do you believe your brand of humor really helps and fits into our world now in these trying times? First, Veronica, and then to Drew.
Well, I love that question because as Stefan said, that when you are in a lot of pain, and there has been a lot of transition with the social justice, our politics, but that is what makes it crucial for us to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And because we are designed to look for the humor, and it also it makes us healthier, it increases our endorphins. It's so needed right now. And that is why it's just so important for us to connect on that humanity level.
Thanks. Drew, your response to that?
Well, as you said, these are unprecedented times, which we know they're unprecedented times because of the unprecedented number of times people have called them unprecedented times. But it is something that is particularly valuable. And as someone mentioned already, that, you know, there's a cliche that says that comedy equals tragedy plus time. And a lot of times people take that as the idea that after enough time has passed, we can find the comedy in that tragedy, right? This is why I can joke about being a super awkward computer geek in high school, because enough time has passed that it's not very real right now. But what I found particularly true during the pandemic is that the reverse is almost true as well. If there is something that tragic happens and we can find the humor in it, it almost feels like more time has passed. It says, despite this adversity that has come up or this challenge that has arisen, when we find humor in it, we can kind of say, I'm laughing in the face of this challenge. It's not going to control me. It's not going to prevent me from doing some of the things that I want to do. And that to me is where humor can become really powerful, because it can reframe a situation so that you almost feel like we have more control over it.
I think it's like, as Drew said, I think comedy is a way to heal the pain of all the things that are happening. And it also lets us be exuberant and joyful, like we were as kids. And especially when you bring that to people's financial trauma. And I think I kind of like bless it with a little forgiveness, and we can move forward into the future with a better attitude. It's like reframing, wouldn't you say, Mark?
Well, you know what? You're right. You said like reframing it, but you said something else. You said it's like we were as kids. I'm going to pivot on that right now. I'm going to go to Stefan. As a kid, did you think you were funny? Were you told you were funny? And did you plan, I'm going to be a banker turned comedian one day?
Well, very good question. I didn't think I was funny. I had two big brothers, so I definitely wasn't getting the last laugh at the house or in school. And I was the one who laughed at everyone and everyone else's jokes. And my laugh would make people laugh. And I would get kicked out of the class because of my laughter. But I wasn't particularly funny. And then my observations, as I was starting to grow and get older, my observations would make people laugh. And later in my career, especially when I started in Toastmasters, I found that I was funny. I just want to take a couple of seconds to agree with Drew and Veronica about the tragedy plus time. It's almost like if you say it, something that's painful, time goes by and it immediately doesn't have power over you.
Yes.
And the perfect example is when I go home to Costa Rica and my family or like my grandma is like, oh, you've gained some weight and you're balding. And I'm like, oh, like I get super angry. But if I say it first, it's like, I'm like, yeah, I know I'm fat and I'm balding. And they're like, oh, like he said it before me, you know? So it doesn't have power over me if I say it first.
Well, it's interesting here to hear you, you all three are kind of analyzing and explaining on a very almost intellectual level how much fun we can have with humor. But I would guess that individuals listening and watching today who may think, wow, Stefan's on the cover of the magazine and, Drew's got 9 million views and Veronica's got Ronnie Dangerfield's last name, but I am not that funny. Could you give us some really simple ways we can make people smile? Is there a formula to make people smile? I'll go with Veronica because she got the whole hand in the air. Me first.
Well, the thing is that, I have a name like a superhero, and also Rodney Dangerfield's only Black child. But also, my blood type is B positive.
Ooh.
So you could take some personal things about yourself and you can flip them. Do you have a nickname that's funny? Can you claim something? Because I personally can claim I am the funniest woman in the credit union world.
There you go. You own that.
Yes, so it's like having a sense of entitlement and then claiming it. You have to commit to comedy like you commit to love and a relationship. You got to love comedy like you love a small child. You got to be committed. You got to be consistent, and you can never give up. Never.
I love that. Now, Drew, can you top that? Simple ways that every people can be funny. Is there a formula, or what can we do to make people smile every day?
Certainly. Well, I mean, it depends on how much time we have to answer that. First of all, I want to give a shout out to some other people in the chat because apparently we're answering questions very well. It feels very polished because people are like, this is a pre-recorded thing, right? It's like, no, I can see you all typing in the chat. Is this pre-recorded or is this live? It's totally live. Shout out to Eunice, Be Positive, Carla saying greetings from Guyana. Like we can actually see what's going on there. But to answer your question, I think that I think everyone has a sense of humor. And so when it comes to determining, are you funny? The real question is, what kind of funny are you? And there's different styles of it. And I believe that there is an art and a science to humor, and we can teach you the science. We're more than happy. Let's do a deep dive into what a comic triple is and what we mean by setup and punchline and what a callback is. And like, we can teach the science piece of it. The art component of humor comes from partially practice and repetition, doing Toastmasters events, going to a stand-up club, taking an improv class. And it's also your sense of humor. It's what you find interesting. And that's where everyone's skill of humor starts with, is just kind of like, what makes you go, huh, that's interesting, or huh, that's curious. And that's how you start to develop that humor. So the quick tip, you asked for a quick tip. The first one that I will give you, one that I'm sure that Stefan and Veronica agree with, is to keep a humor notebook. So that's mine right back there. You keep one notebook where you take, anytime you have one of those ideas, like, huh, that's an interesting thing, you write it down in the humor notebook. Or if something crazy happens to you, you write it down in the humor notebook. If you break your arm, you go to the hospital first and have the nurse write down in the humor notebook for you kind of about that experience. And what that does is two things. One, it helps you remember the funny thing later, because you're like, if you sit down to try to be funny and you're like, this thing that I thought of, it happened to me in the shower this morning where I thought of this funny thing. I didn't write it down right away. And now I'm like, I know exactly where I was standing. I know how the wind was coming in through the window, how the light was shining. I can't remember what the idea was. So you write the idea down. The second thing that writing stuff down does is it changes your perspective. You start to notice the funny things in the world around you simply by doing it a little bit more, and you realize just how many opportunities there are for a little bit of humor.
Oh, wow. Very, very good idea. It's funny. I've been speaking for a long time, and I have one particular tip for finding good stories. I ask my clients to go back over your day and ask yourself these questions. What amazed you? What amused you? And what moved you? Just write it down. And then ask yourself, what can I learn from that? And I think, you've talked about, Drew, do you break your arm? Veronica said, laugh at yourself, your name, I've got this place. And Stefan, you said you were a little kid and you'd laugh and you laugh, made people laugh. And there's a general central theme there where at some point you all use what we call self-deprecating or
Yes.
self-depreciating humor. Stefan, could you explain to us a little bit what that means and how it works for you, certainly in your comedy style?
100%. I'm big on self-deprecating humor, and I think most comedians, well, first of all, most comedians are introverts, and second of all, which a lot of people don't expect, and second of all, I think the majority of people start with self-deprecating humor because it's accessible. It's
Yes.
it's your physique, it's your life, and you've had that self-awareness because as kids in your family you got told stuff, and people tell you things about the way you look or the way you sound. So one of the ways that I use it is in things that have bugged me in the past or things that are horrible stereotypes. I just use it and distort the pressure. I just release the pressure. People can laugh, and it's funny. So, like for example, sometimes I open my shows with, "Hi, my name is Stefan Dyer, and I'm Costa Rican, or as most people call us, Mexican." And that's the thing. Like, if you speak Spanish in North America, people think you're Mexican. So it doesn't bug me because I lived in Mexico and I love Mexicans. But some people may find it offensive, and I just take that, use it. It releases the pressure. It gets people to laugh, and now we can continue. So it can be your height, your hair, your accent, your face, whatever it is that makes you different. Chances are you could get a laugh with that.
Veronica, yeah, follow up question.
So I started my comedy because when I was a little girl, I wasn't raised in the United States. I was raised in Tokyo, Japan, from 5 to 10 years old. And I went from Tokyo, Japan to East Texas, where I did a lot of things wrong because I hadn't been Black for all that long. But because of I was ostracized because I didn't speak, because we had a language problem because nobody in Texas spoke English. But because of that, because of the trauma that I had as a child, it allowed me to take something that was probably pretty devastating and turn it into comedy. Because I was an outsider, and that was my introduction. But all of us have funny stories from our childhood, and as Stefan and Drew talked about, write them in a journal and then practice them.
Yeah.
Just pick random people and tell them the story and see if they laugh. And then you can twerk the language a little bit, and you can get it to where it'll work all the time. Because when you have one good joke, I'm telling you, it never gets stale.
Yeah.
Both you and Drew mentioned practicing. I'm going to get to your response real quickly, Drew. I want to reiterate, all of us can practice, and you don't have to go to a comedy club or an open mic night. I discovered I could practice on my family.
Yes.
They laugh at me a lot, but at least my kids will say, "Dad, that was really, really bad." Great. It just might land then. But you have a Toastmasters club. Use Toastmasters club. Use your family, but try things out, test them, and people don't need to know you're guinea pigs. Drew, your comment.
Yeah, so two things, just to very quickly build off of that is, so, in terms of the workshops that we do, we talk about a couple of different comedian tools. Humor notebook is number one. Number two for us is the stage, right? Every comedian will tell you nothing beats stage time, but also Shakespeare said all the world's a stage. So exactly to Mark's point, it doesn't have to necessarily just be in a stand-up show. It can be, that's what I post to Twitter is mostly just puns, and the ones that kind of like resonate or people retweet, I end up using a little bit later. You can use it in conversations and text messages with people. You can join Toastmasters and groups. So I think that's an important point. But I want to go back to self-deprecating just for a moment, because one, it's an incredibly powerful form of humor, especially when you are in a high status position. So as speakers, there's an automatic status that comes with it. So certainly that's where humor is helpful, where you can, I'll talk about, I'm a frail person. I was born 8.3 pounds and then stayed that way till I was 15 years old. All right. So it's like always very skinny. So that's valuable. But there are some limitations to self-deprecating that I think is valuable to recognize, particularly in the use of humor between men and women. So in one study, if we're talking about in the context of the workplace, they found in one study that when men used humor in the workplace, they were met with a positive response around 80% of the time. Positive response being a smile or a laugh. When women used humor in the workplace, they were met with a positive response 20% of the time.
Yes.
Right? So that's a very big gap. In that same study, they found that 90% of the humor that men used was off the cuff conversational type humor. The women, 70% of the time, they used self-deprecating humor. And so again, self-deprecating humor, great when you're in a high status position and when used sparingly. Because you might know those people if you only use self-deprecating humor, unless you're Rodney Dangerfield, which builds like an entire career of it. But for the most part, in a workplace setting, people start to wonder like, wait, does this person have self-esteem issues? Can I actually still laugh? Or is that actually a bad thing? Like, is this a pity party? What's going on there? And if there is gender bias in the workplace and status is already perceived to be a little bit lower for whatever reason, then to use self-deprecating humor, it only lowers that status a little bit more. So again, incredibly powerful when in a high status position. I just want to make sure that we're not saying go all in on self-deprecating humor, only use that. It's like, no, it's a great way to start so that people know that you have a sense of humor, but then from there you can move to other types.
Well, one good point you make is be aware of what your audience hears, what your audience sees, and what they're thinking, because their perception, it could backfire. Now, don't get all scared, people. We want to have fun, and I want to go into the idea of being in the workplace and also as speakers and presenters, because it's what we do at Toastmasters. We talk to people, but in a workplace setting, even in interviews, is there a role, Stefan, for people to use humor in a workplace, maybe in a job interview? Do you think?
I think it's always good to use it. You got to be really aware of the situation.
Yes.
It may serve you well, but at the same time, which is a feedback that I got at the beginning of my career in the bank, I would make everyone laugh so much that one day, like my boss, who I really appreciate, his name was Dave, he came up to me and he was like, with our team, do that. It's okay to make us laugh, but in front of executives and everyone in a serious meeting, they think you don't care, like you're indifferent, you're just having a good time, making everyone laugh. And it might be misinterpreted that you're not serious about your job. And obviously there's some cultural nuances, and you have to be aware of what country you're at. Like in Latin America, it may be very normal to joke around all the time. But in North America, there's times where you do it, times where you don't do it, even in Latin America. So I think it's very useful to at times break the ice, like Drew said, if you're not in a high status, because it allows people to relax. You position yourself as, hey, I'm just one of the guys, normal. And when people are not intimidated, you tend to work a lot better. And one of the quotes that I love is that relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. And it's hard to be vulnerable when everyone's just trying to be like super perfect. So humor is a great way of just getting everyone to laugh, release the tension, and now we can move on to the next stage, get down to business. So you can use it in interviews and in the workplace, but just be aware of the tone and the vibe of the situation.
Thanks.
I find it great as a teaching tool, because when you can take a complex topic that might be very traumatic for people and put a blanket of humor around it, it makes people relax. You can connect, and it also gets them, and it's also very fast. So if I can connect with them through humor, then I can get right to the teaching of the different behaviors that can liberate them and give them quality thoughts and a quality life through love, because I think that humor is a form of love.
I love that. And I want to let Drew respond to that. But I also want to ask, because now we're Toastmasters, we have been able to travel the world from our chairs, doing virtual meetings. So internationally, Drew, if you've done any talking internationally, what are some of the concerns you have or cautions for us who are now getting a chance to speak on different continents right here from our desks regarding humor and understanding cultural nuance? Any thoughts on that for you, Drew? And then Stefan.
Certainly. So the way that we frame, because I'm an engineer, I like kind of like the specificity of things. The way that we frame using humor in the workplace is what we call our humor map. And this is the final, like it's been pretty good. So when we think of the skill of humor on our side, we think of sense of humor, which you can build by using your humor notebook, your ability to humor, which you get better at by getting on the humor stage. And the third piece is your agency with humor, your application of humor. And this you can develop by using what we at least frame as a humor map, which stands for your medium, your audience, and your purpose. And so we've talked a lot about that audience piece. Absolutely, you have to adapt to who's going to be listening. What are they going to actually find funny? What do they want? What does that audience need? What do they expect? So that you can give them what they need in a way maybe that they don't quite expect. To your point, Mark, virtual changes the medium, and it's very different to present in a virtual setting than in a in-person setting. One quick tip I would give is, and I learned this from Mark Bowen, a great body language expert, is to put a little smiley face right next to your webcam, or googly eyes if you need to, but that way you're constantly checking in with the webcam, because that's eye contact versus like looking at yourself the entire time. Also, like, frame your video. You don't want to do what like some people do, where they do what I call
Kilroy.
the turtle.
Yeah,
The turtle there, or the Batman, right? Understand your mute button. You don't want to under that. Right? So understand the medium that you're going to do it. And then the last one, the one that I think is most important to Stefan's point, and also some people in the chat who are saying like, yeah, sometimes I'm not taken seriously. The most important is the purpose, is why are you using humor in the workplace setting? Because the goal is not to be seen as a comedian. It's not to be like, oh, that person is so funny, but it's to get better results. And so when you use humor, not to replace the work, but to enhance it. When you use humor, like, oh, I'm going to start with a story so that people are actually listening and paying attention to what I've said, or I'm going to use an association so that they understand this idea a little bit better, or I'm going to add a little bit of incongruity so I can like perk people up a little bit as I go longer and longer as I speak. Like, those reasons all help to create humor that is not only funny, but also effective towards a larger goal.
That's a good, wonderful answer, giving some good technique, being aware of who we are, where we are, what environment is. Both you and Stefan mentioned that. I'm going to jump to Stefan very quickly about a little deeper on the idea of having international audiences. And you do humor in two different languages. You know, you do Spanish and English. I speak in two languages. I speak English and poor English. But when you have audiences that are international, cross-cultural, what are the cautions you would have for us who now have this medium of Toastmasters worldwide? We can try to be funny to an audience in Saudi Arabia or China or Korea. What do we look out for, Stefan, and then Veronica as well?
Oh, it's an art. I tell you, you have to be very, very aware of who you're talking to. Knowing your audience is almost half the battle. And I would say my audience is the immigrant audience. That's my favorite audience because I'm an immigrant myself. So when I'm there, I can go hard, and I know that certain people, because we're all immigrants, especially in Spanish, Latinos, they may not get offended if I say this or that, or they may get offended if I say this or that, or if I speak to an all Anglo-Saxon audience or all white audience in Canada, I may not have jokes where they're the victim of the joke that much, you know? But if I'm only talking to Latinos, maybe, yeah. And one of the things that we say in comedy is that not necessarily safe, but smart to do this is that you always punch up. Don't punch down at people who can't defend themselves or are already the victims. Like if a politician has abused his or her power, and I punch up because they're in power, that's okay. Nobody's going to get that angry. But if I punch down towards a demographic that has been typically abused for years or decades, that's not funny. Like that, you just punching down, that's not that funny. So you have to be very aware and understand the cultural differences of who you're speaking to. So and it comes with practicing as well. Like it's not like you wake up one day and you're really good at it. The other thing that happens is that the more you practice, you understand, you get that really good self-awareness of what people actually find funny about you and your life, not what you think is funny about you and your life. But this is the audience. So the more you do it, you get greater self-awareness about what people actually like and what you're good at. So it becomes your style and not you trying to imitate someone on TV or on Netflix.
Veronica?
I agree 100%. And what my persona is that I try to come at my audience with love and acceptance and grace, and I use humor to connect. So hopefully, if they get an understanding of who I am and where I'm coming from, that kind of it gives us all an equal playing ground, because I am one of you and I am on your team. And I am coming to support you in living your best life, because that's what I want to do, Mark. I want to perform a comic miracle and have you reframe how you look at things so that you're happier. And hopefully I'm successful, but that's always the goal.
Well, I love that answer because that gives me a nice setup. Drew, I'm going to go with you first, then Veronica and Stefan. A question for each of you. What was it like? Have you ever bombed? Drew.
Which time would you like me to talk about? There's so
Last
many.
Tuesday?
Last Tuesday, yeah. How recent do you want to go? But actually, so there was, and I think the stories in the bombing are actually particularly helpful. So to your point about an international audience, a couple of years ago, I was in Singapore speaking, and I had never been to Malaysia. So I was like, maybe I can go to Malaysia and I can do stand-up comedy. So I got booked on an English-speaking stand-up show in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. And I go, and I was relatively early in the lineup because I was a new addition. And I go up, and it's relatively crickets as I am performing. And I come off stage, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's just one of those audiences that doesn't express their laughter out loud. Because sometimes you have that. Like sometimes you'll speak for a group and there will be no laughter whatsoever, and then they'll come up after you very stone-faced and be like, that was the greatest presentation I've ever seen. And of course, the cliche that we say in the speaking industry is like, tell your face. If you're enjoying the experience, tell your face so that we can see that. That's particularly true in a virtual environment. Have your videos on and have people laugh so they can get that. But so like maybe it's one of those audiences. The guy after me goes up and he crushes it. He was like, as it like, you know, Dave Chappelle like level of like funny or whatever. The audience loved it. And I realized, and one of his funniest jokes was actually a callback to a joke that I tried to make. He just did it better, which was like, he's clearly like now messing with me. Like he knows he's very good. But the thing that I recognized from that was I didn't understand my audience. It was my first time doing comedy in Asia, in Malaysia. And I assumed what worked in Europe, like when I've done presentations and stuff in the UK and Germany and other places, I took some of that same material and assumed, oh, it's international. They'll like all the international stuff. And I hadn't done my homework. And what I've found for myself as I've presented more internationally is, especially as a speaker, there's three things that have really helped. One, slowing down. I like to speak really fast, and for people with English as a second language, sometimes it takes a moment and you need a little bit longer of a pause so that you don't step on your laughter. Two is using more stories, because people can identify with stories. Mark and I were joking before this, like I love puns. For the fellow pun lovers out there, a recent pun that I really enjoyed on that was recently just posted on LinkedIn was, if you started dating someone online and then you break up, that person just becomes your WebEx.
Boom.
Yeah, exactly. A little pun there, but might not be for everyone. So not puns, but more stories. And then the last thing that we can really use as speakers is I love visuals. So I use a lot of pictures in my presentations. I embed them in my video itself. And pictures, speak 1,000 words. You don't have to speak any language to be able to see an interesting or humorous picture and have a connotation to it right then. So that's kind of what I've learned from a recent bombing. And yes, it still happens less and not as bad as it used to, but there's always something to be learned when it happens.
Thank you. Stefan.
It's part of the journey, Mark. it always happens, and you just have to show up. I mean, like Drew said, now it happens a lot less than my first year. And now I understand I always arrive early, always see the audience, see the table. I start talking to a little bit of people. I start seeing how they're reacting. I start seeing if there's like weird things in the audience, or not like crazy weird stuff, but like if there's a table of 10 girls and one guy, or if there's like a table of 8 grandparents, or if there's a one person by themselves, or all these things are info that I can use. And to reduce a little bit my chances of failing, what I do is, because I feel like if you go hard with the first joke at the beginning, it's high stakes. Like if that doesn't land, it's downhill from there. So what I do is I start with like one-liners, which are short jokes, and I start having a conversation with the audience just to understand them a little bit, and crowd working with them. Then I start seeing, okay, and the stakes are not high when you're talking to the audience, because it's just conversation. Like it's not like I go and like, "Duh," and nobody laughs. You know, it's just a conversation. So I'm not really risking anything. You always have to go back on the drawing board, even if you do really well or really horrible, and in your humor notebook, write what happened, what went well, what didn't go well. And I always record myself, and it's painful to see yourself on video, like horrible, because you think you sometimes did better than you actually did, but it's where I've learned the most about me. And that's what I always do. I go back to the video, see what worked and what didn't. So bombing is always an opportunity.
Well, you know what? Recording is easy. Watching is hard.
Oh,
So, Veronica, have you ever bombed, and what did you learn?
I got heckled one night in a comedy club by a dog. So that's all I'm going to say about that. The dog went crazy. It did not like the joke, and it would not shut up. But then the good news was the whole night was about the dog heckling. So you couldn't get a better joke after that. That was just it. So.
What you and Stefan and Drew just told me is use your failure as material for later presentations. Now, I know our time is fast, fleeting, and I want to get to one more question specifically regarding Toastmasters. As a speaking coach, I have several clients who come to me, Mark, I've got this great speech. Now, all I want to do is add humor. What are your thoughts on adding humor versus uncovering humor? Stefan, Veronica, and then Drew. Very quickly, short question. Your thoughts on uncovering versus adding humor. Stefan.
So it's always great to add humor. What I would recommend is putting the main premise of your speech in the middle and doing bubbles around it of where the pain points are of whatever you're presenting. And where the pain points are, there's chances that there's going to be humor around it. So not everything is going to have humor about your speech, but if you focus on the top 3 parts of whatever you're presenting that has the most pain around it, chances are you could get some laughter, because you're going to create some tension when you mention it and then release it by being vulnerable, by saying where you've messed up, by telling a story. Anything that connects with the audience through pain points may get you a laugh, but the tonality is incredibly important. That's why you have to practice.
So Veronica, I shouldn't just go find a joke I saw on the Reader's Digest or on Twitter somewhere and put that in my speech?
Well, I think that if it's naturally, if you can't find the humor, if you have a funny friend and you tell them the story, get some support around that. I have quote books on humor, and I love to watch comedy shows. In fact, I make laughter a part of my daily activity. I do not go to bed until I have a good laugh. So with all that infusion, it will support you on making, having a fun life, having a funnier life, and making your communications funnier.
Thank you. Andrew?
Absolutely. So the way that I think about adding humor to a speech is there's 3 ways to do it in my kind of perspective. The first is that you write something from scratch. And that's actually the hardest one. Like you go through and you're like, let me create a specific humor moment exactly like right now from nothing. And to me, that is difficult. It's possible to do. There's certain exercises and things that you can do, but it's the hardest because you suffer from the paradox of choice a lot of time. The second way is to take something that is already funny and see how it can fit into your program. Now, certainly for larger speaking, sometimes that can be, you don't always have to be the creator of humor. Sometimes you can be the curator of humor and bring in other things, or even the funny stories. Like if there's a story that you tell your friends and family and they always crack up about, or there's, something that happens and you've already created funny, you can look at it and be like, okay, what are the lessons in this story and how do they apply to what I'm talking about? Right? If you've seen my TEDx talk, I do a bit on math pickup lines that existed before I did that talk, but I realized, oh, math pickup lines and using them in a bar is kind of like needing to be confident. Oh, this is also true in humor. So now I can bring the thing that I already know is funny and good, I can bring into my speech. The third way, the way that we do the most work with a lot of the people that we work on one-on-one with, is to take something that is unfunny and make it funny. And there's a couple of techniques that we use. That's where I talked about kind of the science piece of it. Like, for example, if you are trying to make a concept funny, if you have to explain something, you're talking about your strategy for stress management or whatever it happens to be, and you want to make it funny, you can create an association. I love this writing exercise called a 10 by 10 matrix, where you write down 10 things related to the specific thing that you are training. And then 10 things related to a passion that you have, like one passion, one hobby, or something that the audience is going to enjoy. Write 10 things related to that. And you'll start to notice, are there connections between the two? So can I explain stress management while talking also about Queen's Gambit or Bridgerton or golf or running? And that inherently makes it more interesting because you've now created a great metaphor or association, and you can make humor about the thing you're associating with and still keep the topic a little bit more serious or on point if that's needed.
Wow, Drew, Stefan, and Veronica, so much wisdom. I took notes. Have a daily laugh. Know your audience. Use images. Use self-deprecating humor. Have a humor notebook. Record and review. Rehearse. Find the pain. Gain support from a friend, and so much more. I want to thank you all for the wisdom you've given us today. I'm going to return control to Linda because we have several questions that have come in. I'm going to sit back and drink in the wisdom. Linda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I was taking notes as well. Everyone, the insights, stories, fantastic tips, just helping us all find our funny, not trying to be somebody else. So I want to hear more from all of you. So let's shift right into the question and answer portion of our program and find out what else our audience has been asking about. I'm going to start. We've tried to put some of the categories together. I'm going to start with Stefan. We talked a little bit about audience, and we have a few questions related to tips for international audiences. So Ruth asked, do you have any tips for international audiences, especially what not to do? And I know all of you touched on a few things. And then are there any easy go-to humor topics that transcend cultures? Lisa wanted to know. Stefan?
100%. Thank you, Linda. So 2 things off the top that are safe: never religion, never politics, unless you're sure that demographic has your views of the joke. But I still wouldn't recommend it because it's a gamble. So what I would recommend is, if your story is yours and your point of view is yours, then even if people disagree, it may be funny because you are the victim of the joke. So self-deprecating humor in cultural scenarios is great because, like, for example, in Latino, like there's a Latino stereotype where, like, oh, because of narcos and whatever, that there's drug lords and everyone's a drug lord. And I take that and turn it negative into positive. And I say, well, I'm an eternal immigrant. I was born in Costa Rica. I lived in Peru, Mexico, El Salvador, Montreal, and Toronto, all because of my dad's job. My dad's a drug lord. And I use that, and I'm the victim. Like my dad is the drug lord. So nobody's like, oh, he said that no, I'm making fun of myself and that stereotype. So understand people's views. And the way you can do it is, one, asking the organizer who's going to be there, what type of people from what industry, audience, countries, ages. If they don't know, always arrive early and talk to people, see who they are. And if you can't do that because you're in the green room, then live, you can do that as well by going, by show of hands, who here is in marketing? By show of hands, who here is in university? So you can do that in real time yourself. And it works really well.
Thanks, Stefan. I'm sure that everyone has even more tips on that, but I want to make sure we cover a few topics. So I'm going to go to Veronica next. All of you talked a little bit about comedy equals tragedy plus time and things that were painful in the past. But Kelly asked specifically, how do we make painful funny? And someone else also asked, why are things that are supposed to be sad, like COVID-19, sometimes funny? So Veronica, could you address that?
Yeah, I think that this speaks to the complexity of the human brain, that when we actually experience something and we really understand it, the point of the funny part of it is the part where we start to heal from it. I think it's more of a brain function and how comedy works, because comedy does take the tragedy and the present moment, and in the present moment you can laugh because in the present moment typically there is no suffering. You are in the moment and it's funny. So that's how it is. It's one of the wonderful things about being a human. We have a very complex brain and it seeks to heal. And I think that's where humor comes in.
Yeah, and I would just add one quick addition to that is there's a great Kurt Vonnegut quote that says, laughter and tears are equal responses to frustration. I myself prefer to laugh because there's less cleaning up to do afterwards. Yeah. And so sometimes it's a perspective shift. It's saying, okay, this thing happened. I can't control whether or not it happened, something like COVID-19, but I can control my response to it. And can I find either the humor in it, and sometimes this is where gratitude comes in. I love the question of what's not wrong with my life. Not what's great about my life, but what's not wrong with my life. And that helps you to start to see, while there are a lot of challenges, things that are tough, it helps you to start to identify some of the things that aren't so bad.
Great perspective.
Great. Thank you. Well, Drew, I'm going to stick with you now. We're talking about laughs, and quite a few people have asked about virtual presentations, etc., versus live. So how do you stay motivated as the presenter or the speaker during a workshop like this when you can't hear the audience? And you mentioned a few things, some of you already, but normally we get energy from the laughs. And is there anything else you can add about making virtual presentations, more humorous?
Absolutely. It's a great question. A couple of things that we recommend as we're doing coaching with virtual trainings, or things that I do as well. One is in smaller groups, when we're doing our virtual stand-up shows, or if we're doing something that's, probably 100 or less people, we'll encourage and have some people unmute their microphones if they have a quiet background, so that we can hear that laughter. And that's something that you can do as a person setting up the event, how to do that. The other thing is that we strongly encourage people to have their videos on, so that even if you can't hear the laughter, you can kind of see the head noddings and the smiling. And we'll make a joke about it because not everyone wants their video on. And so a lot of times I'll say, seeing a lot of people who don't have their video on, I'll admit I'm always a little bit skeptical of people who have their video off. It's like, what are you trying to hide? Is it, a bad hair day? Are you stuffing your face with food? Do you have an embarrassing Backstreet Boys poster on your wall? What is it? And just adding humor to it, calling it out, tends to bring in a few more people that are like, all right, fine, I'll actually put my video on. So we encourage that to see it. But I think the best tip that I can give is just assume that you are crushing it.
Yes.
Right? As you are presenting, just assume that you're nailing it, because to have any other mindset, to have are they laughing? I don't know, doesn't actually help you to perform better. That's why you record it, you go back and improve a little bit later, but in the moment, just assume that they're laughing at every single joke, that it's completely landing. And that I think can be a strong kind of piece to get you to perform what you need to perform in order to deliver the humor in a way that people resonate with.
And along with that is I actually laugh at my jokes because it gives my audience time to actually respond to the joke, because then I'm not going to run over it. And also, I think I'm very funny, so I keep the joviality going. It's like, yes, this is funny, and I am fun, and we will laugh now.
You mean don't bring my wife in and make her sit behind the camera and make her laugh for me? That won't work?
It does work. You can also do a laugh track with you. I've like done that as a joke as well.
Dream deck,
Like,
huh?
listen, if you all don't laugh, I'm going to use a laugh track button, and I think I'm way funnier than you probably do. So every 3 seconds, it's going to be like a sitcom.
Yay,
You can also
Drew.
encourage the chat as well. Like, that's another thing. At the beginning, we'll encourage people, use the chat. A simple LOL or a haha or your own thoughts does help to resonate with the speaker so that they know that they're getting some type of feedback.
Great, thank you. Mark, you're not off the hook. I'm going to give a question to you.
Okay.
Any tips on how to be funny or keep a sense of humor, both in a stressful situation as well as when you're personally scared of coming across as awkward or sounding like you're forcing the humor? Any tips around that?
Life is stressful. And I go back to what Stefan said. If I realize that my life and my experience can cause the audience to relax and laugh, I'll turn to my own self-depreciation first, because I think if I can get them to laugh at me, then they'll relax and say I'm a regular guy. I'm not some superstar. I'm human. I want to have fun with life. So I turn it on me first. And it also relaxes me. And I believe if we can get people to laugh, it's not just funny for the moment, but it's funny for our lives. We can experience some joy together. It's a common connector. So laugh at me, I laugh at myself, and let's move on. That's my technique.
Thank you, Mark.
Beautiful.
Yes.
So Stefan, I know you mentioned that you joined Toastmasters not realizing you were funny. So I'm going to send a question from Sherry, who is also a Toastmaster and is asking about her club. She says, our club is wanting to interject some humor, good feelings, and fellowship into our virtual meetings. I am not by nature funny or comfortable telling jokes. So I'm looking for any suggestions on how to include humorous, good feelings to our regular meetings. Do you have suggestions?
Oh, so many. So first of all, I myself don't know any jokes. Like, I don't know jokes. I just talk about my life.
Yes.
And I am vulnerable. I tell my truth, and I share my tragedies, my pain points. And by being honest and candid, I started to get people to laugh with me or at me. I don't know at the beginning, but I immediately went into the humor path and started to learn about that as soon as even when it was like serious speeches, I would get laughs and I didn't understand why. So I started reading, I started taking workshops, I started taking the humor path, and listen and read all the feedback you get. And when you establish the rules of the game, even for virtual presentations, like Drew said, it works wonders, because if you tell people, listen, I want to start getting more laughs. Can you give me tips or what you thought was funny about my presentation? Then you get that self-awareness about what people think that's funny about you, not what you think is funny. And when you say, I'm going to tell you a really funny story, don't say that, because then people expect like the best story. And just be yourself and understand and get that self-awareness from people. At the same time, I like to say that, yes, experience is the best teacher, but it's also costly. So if you want to just like fail on stage and for 9 years until you become really good, then okay, do it. But if you can get really good while getting on stage, whatever your stage is, and take workshops, read books, get feedback, then maybe you'll get really good in 5 years. So yes, experience on the stage is the best teacher, but there's also like so many resources nowadays in 2021. YouTube is great too.
And one quick tip very quickly. In regular conversation, if you get any kind of reaction, a chuckle, a smile, or a breakout laugh, there you go, Drew, write that down. What did I just say? What made them laugh? Because sometimes we have humor and we don't even know it.
Yes.
Linda.
Humor is like falling in love with a child. You gotta be consistent, you gotta be committed, and you should never give up.
Fantastic. Well, perfect timing. Unfortunately, our time is up for our question and answers. And thank you so much, Mark, Stefan, Veronica, and Drew, for spending this time with us together. It has just been fantastic. Members of the audience, if you enjoyed today's session, please register right away because we're running out of room for tomorrow's webinar, the Humor Workshop Part 2. Find out why laughter is the best medicine and how to hone that healing power of humor that Veronica mentioned today, as well as our other panelists. And as I mentioned, we will be sending the recording of today's workshop to everybody who registered, whether you were able to attend today or not. And please feel forward to I can't talk today. Feel free to forward, too many F's, to your friends, colleagues, etc., who you think will benefit from the insights of our connoisseurs of comedy. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We wish you a wonderfully whimsical and hopefully humor-filled rest of your day.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you all. It was
Thank
fun.
you.
Thank you all.